ahead and get started. People will come and go.
Yes, they will.
A few of you were here last week. This is Moody Castro, who is a curator-in-residence with us for a couple of months at CentralTrak. And this project, she has a video.
I won't get into too much detail because some of you guys heard this last week, but basically I was invited by HUD about 2 years ago to come and do an exhibition as well as a residency. And so I put together, you know, your normal proposal for this project that I wanted to do with 2 artists in Mexico City named Alex Dorfman and Diego Perez. This is a work by Alex that kind of leads into this. The 2 of them are photographers. But they work very, very, very differently. They're colleagues and friends. I've known them both for a really long time. They're really, really well-respected artists in Mexico City. I don't know what's going on with the connection. So I kind of wanted to pair them up together to see what would happen. That's not going to happen. So let's do this. So Alex was really interested in issues of archiving and how we think about archiving the world. And so he started with a Rolodex here that he found at a flea market in Mexico City and thought about how do we archive our lives, how do we archive our world, and then proceeded to take photographs of just normal encyclopedic objects and then paired them together in this sort of crossword puzzle, is that the word? Yeah, crossword puzzle kind of configuration. So he was going to take one wall and basically do these really big crossword puzzle configurations. And then Diego, who's really interested in documenting changes around the landscape, both with photography and with sculpture, was going to do a road trip from Mexico City. From Mexico City to Dallas and collect objects along the way and take photographs to kind of do a site-specific installation here about geography and migrations and how people move. And I'd say, whoa. We couldn't get the funding. It was going to be about an $8,000 project, so I separated the projects and decided that, well, we could do Alex's project kind of out in the public space. People do this in Mexico City all the time. It's funded by the city and by the government. We could do this in Fair Park. We could do this in Cleveland.
I was going to stop, Leslie, for just a second and interject, just for perspective. What CentralTrak's budget has been for programming and doing exhibitions. So Leslie needed $8,000 for this project. For the last couple of years, we've had about $500 to deal with our entire season. So that was like deciding whether to buy toilet paper or light bulbs. This last year, we got $11,000, which was huge and exciting, but it was to do 12 months worth of programming. That was exhibitions, lectures, workshops. It didn't allow us to give artists honorariums or artists who were doing exhibition stipends. It's very tight. That money goes really quickly. And so the idea of, there have been projects that I was curating or interested in curating that would cost about the same or less or half, but still it was such a huge part of our yearly budget for programming. So I was faced for the last few years with curating around no money. And I would kind of joke about how Peter Doroshenko had to curate by the acre because the Dallas Contemporary is so huge, and I had to curate based on no money, what I could get for free, or what I could drive in my car back to Houston, back to Dallas.
Or what you paid for out of your own pocket at times, because I know you did.
I did invest in CentralTrak, which was probably, a bad idea. But when you want something,
but you are showing up porn.
I try to fit that in whenever I can. But Larry Flint has not come through with his grant. But yeah, I just wanted to interject, and Leslie will go on with this pitch, but I just wanted to tell you what $8,000 meant to CentralTrak in terms of our annual budget.
And when you're producing an exhibition, these budgetary issues always happen, so it really becomes about finding a really creative way to try and make it work, and then trying to fundraise as much as possible.
And so that makes it work without prostituting yourself.
Right, exactly.
It's a very difficult issue that to do those things that don't completely take you off your messages.
Right, and compromising the work, absolutely. And so this book,
Can I ask you to expound on this specific exhibition that you're going over right now?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more.
Okay.
So this is actually just a random exhibition that was in two public parks in Mexico City that I was kind of referencing when I was pulling the exhibitions apart. And so I figured Alex's work would be really nice in this public space. Maybe the city could pay for it. Maybe we can go in that direction. And then Diego can just do his road trip and we can pay for that and have that happen here. And I whittled the budget down to like, I think it was like $6,000. Reduced my honorarium from $2,000 to like $1,000 or something. But with that, I also had to make sure that Diego got paid first. And so in the end, I probably would not have gotten anything at all, because it's really important for me for artists to get paid. And so this would be kind of like the type of objects and sculptures Diego would have made. And then I guess it was like in December of last year, in 2014, that I got a message from Laura saying the university offered $2,500 for the project, and that I needed to say yes or no by January 15th. And what I realized that it was going to be a huge fundraising effort for myself, for Laura, and Hyde, and I already had 3 other projects I was working on at that point. I couldn't devote 100% of my time to fundraising for it. I'd been to Dallas like 3 or 4 times. I'd worked with the consulate. They couldn't provide money. They could provide in-kind stuff. That was it. And Laura and Hyde are the 2 full-time people at CentralTrak, and they've just got way too much on their hands. Also, they have to manage other projects as well. So I was having a conversation with a colleague in Texas State University, and she looked at me and she said, what is that saying about your value as a curator and about how the university really values CentralTrak? And I was like, okay, that's it, that's the conversation we need to have. So I then called Hyde, and I was like shaking on the phone, and this was the beginning of January, and I called Hyde, and I was in Mexico City at the time, and I said, Hyde, I think we're gonna cancel the show, and I think we're gonna leave the gallery empty, because that's how much the university is valuing what we do. They have this expectation that they can give you $500 and expect that you'll do this programming for the entire year, and it's going to be awesome and fabulous, but no one shows up. The university anyway, you guys are awesome.
Greg's from UTD today.
And Greg reached out to me this week too. Thank you so much for that. There's just it's just the message that the university is sending is one that, yes, CentralTrak, do your stuff, but we don't want to be hands-on.
And we have to talk about, at some point, the history of how artists themselves proliferate this idea, because we do so much for free.
Totally. Because
we'd rather do it than not do it, and we end up complicit in this system of exploitation.
So then I decided, parallel to closing the gallery, that I would reach out to the Dallas Observer, or a magazine in Dallas, and write weekly articles about the issue of value, and use CentralTrak as kind of this microcosmic space within Dallas that's in a bigger issue that's happening, and to talk about culture and value of culture in the United States in general. So these are coming out every week. This one was just an interview that Lauren did with me to kind of kick off the articles. Last week I talked about the project and why it was canceled and the process of canceling it. And then, because, you said it in an email one time, it was like, we have this idea that the show must go on, but at some point we're just shooting ourselves in the foot, by not standing up for what we're worth. And then to think about the fact that originally my honorarium in this budget was $2,000, if you divide that between 2 years and 6 months, that's like, what, like $2 a month or something crazy. And then the weekend I arrived was the weekend of the art fair, which was this like incredibly opulent, decadent, excessive event. And I went to the opening day, and did all the events around the opening day, and like the champagne corks were like popping around everywhere. It was crazy, and it was like gala dresses. It was insane. I've never seen a level of decadence like that before at an art fair. And then the closing party, which was just over the top.
The eyeball.
I didn't get to it.
You didn't miss anything. There was a donut wall. There was a donut wall. Yeah. So that was where this reference actually came from. I was happy to see my donut wall was this closing party. But as I was there, I don't really know that many people yet. I'm just getting to meet people. I've been here for 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks maybe. But it was really obvious that there weren't any artists at the party, and the artists that were there were not invited.
We snuck in.
And so the message was really about like projecting this facade that Dallas has. And then the few artists that were there that I talked to, I kept asking them like, how can people get away with this? I don't understand. I know this is a fair. I know it's a commercial venture. I know it's very different, but even fairs in Latin America will support projects by artists within the fair site themselves. And the answer that I just got resoundingly was, this is Dallas. So it was kind of in that moment that I was like, okay, we need to talk about this more, and this is how the problem all came up. And so last week we had a session, just like this, that we'll be having through the course of the exhibition, non-exhibition, where we're writing problems that are contributing to this, like perpetuating the cycle on this wall here, and then probably next week we'll write solutions on this wall here. So this is really about sitting and talking about the problems, getting them out in the open, really discussing them, making them transparent, and then trying to figure out the steps that we can take to maybe solve them. And really using CentralTrak and its relationship with the university.
And we're aware of the risk we're taking here by perhaps biting the hand that feeds. I mean, like this institution or this program through UTD, it's really incredible that this exists in the first place. And there's so much potential for what we can do. Like, I can't imagine that we're meeting and talking about this thing anywhere else in this casual way, but just that we have a place to meet.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, we've got to dig in and ask for full support. Like, are we going to do this?
And we're not connected.
We're trying to figure that out. We don't know. Greg can speak to that some.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing thing. You're just getting, right now, the university has done this big swing towards putting all their money into the art and technology program, and they see that as having appeased all ends of, programming, whereas what we've learned is that they don't value our space, they don't value, it's a science university, science and engineering and medical, pre-med school for, feeding TI and all of these other, and so they've gone the route of gaming, et cetera. So every time money comes up, it's just enough to start, to kind of, it's kind of like starving the beast, and then the beast just becomes used to being starved, and you quit asking, at some point, because it's and you realize that, and they really don't equate this idea that you can, every other part of the university advocates for funding through grants and through sponsorship from industry and the military and et cetera to fund their, So when you go over to the 3D design lab and you see, they have a makerspace, they have sponsored, lockers, and they have sponsored this and all of that, and we haven't, and they don't really realize that, we're a valuable cultural commodity that is imperative for them to have to maintain their, tier 1 kind of aspirations, and they are then
and like corporations, they sort of want to see a return on their investment within a quarter or two, instead of like the long game, which is making Dallas an interesting place to live.
So in a way, to compete for that funding, we have to learn how to start to enter into getting some of that sponsorship, and that's the way they see it. They don't see giving us anything. They think that we, should solicit it through our research and our,
Now, Sylvia, you started to talk about the idea of staying true to your mission, and how corporate sponsorship can dictate your content, or you have to be really careful. You have to.
Well, I really want to mention it in 3 ways. That crisis of the artist and innovation and cutting edge things has difficulty raising money in the same way the university expects traditional art to raise it. So the first thing is I think we have to get out of our mind that we're going to go to those great big traditional donors. There are different levels of donors who will give smaller amounts for this kind of new work. We have two problems. One, my dog's licking my leg, and it's very awkward to talk while someone's there with your feet. But anyway, but the thing is, we have to look at other sources. We have another major problem, though, that we have only 2 staff, okay? Our artists are working on their projects.
Yeah.
We have people coming in, but we have no one who is making the presence for those alternative people. They want personal contact and specific, sometimes cutting-edge things to do. So one, we have to look at different sources when it's traditional. You have to, in some ways, work within your system to allow them to give you that latitude, okay? And you have to know that in some ways you'll be punished simultaneously because they will withdraw money when you raise it. So my point is, let's not buy into the way. Let's give as much freedom and go for alternative sources. Having a core that remains stable, and then seeking for innovation. You know, but you can't do it by yourself.
No.
And you can't do it with just Laura. You have to have some mic behind you of people who think like you.
In speaking to, you know, as you add up your assets, the publicity that this place has gotten to the university is worth its weight, you know, and it's like figuring out how to convert that into, you know,
into a commodity of sorts.
into, you know, sponsorship of some sort, you know, and I think that because you can't have generated this much programming and this much, you know, in the accolades, the people who have come through here and been part of, and how it's been an active stimulus, a catalyst for a lot of things, especially, but it's hard to even get, you know, a cut on the rent here.
Right.
And you're wondering, you know, so, you know, like creating a, you know, a conversion coefficient that someone can, in the right hands, can take and understand. But I think some of that is happening a little bit. I mean, they're starting to pay more attention to us than they have in the past.
Right.
And
How so?
well, just in realizing all the things that we do. I mean, because the president up till now has been totally divorced from anything that we've done. He's never been to
You're talking about arts and humanities.
the arts and humanities. I mean, he's never been to an opening. He's never been to anything down here. He's never been to, you know, so he has no idea what's going on. And some of that, but now he's starting to, and I think a lot of it has come from, you know, Rick Rutel's, the attention to Rick Rutel's programming and realizing, oh, you know, there is some funding to be had there. There is some importance in how that gets tied in. And,
This is the thing. There's a lot of money here. I mean, Dallas there's funders here. There's ways to make these things happen, but I don't understand why it's not trickling down to the people on the grassroots level.
Because partially, we are the gorillas who beat on our chest.
You're what? What's that?
The gorillas. People pound their chest and say they're great. The Dallas is great. It's not necessarily very deep. And the great stuff goes to New York and London and Berlin and Paris. They don't stay here with their money. So there are piles of money, but
You're
the
talking
piles of
about
money.
collectors?
I'm talking about donors and collectors who are big time. So we have to give to those people who have not only art interests, but social interests. And those are foundations, individuals. Our buzz in the community from the institutions is that we're unusual because we cross the line between the things like universities and those guys in the field. Okay, those guys working. And that image, whether true or not, is worth having if you're going to go out and get money from different groups. But the big time issue, everyone hears that, Les. Everyone hears how much money Dallas has, but their giving tends to be what's acceptable to other rich people.
As a related question, can you personally speak to your insights of the patrons of the art fair? Did you say you went to the art fair as well as the closing and after party?
I went to the entire opening day of the art fair. I had a media badge with Flash Art International because I also write for Flash Art International and Art Forum and Art Museum magazine. And so I went to, I mean, we were there for like pretty much the entire day. We came home between the media opening, came home and kind of got ready for the VIP opening that night, which was popping champagne stuff and like full on ball gowns, which was, I've never seen that before. It was crazy. And then I got sick between the opening day and the closing day, so I missed everything in between, which I'm kind of okay with. And then the very last day, I got out of bed, finally, and went and spent the entire day at the fair and actually looked at all the galleries and took photos and posted things on Facebook and whatnot to kind of diffuse information and show what was happening at the fair. And then that night was a closing party. That evening after the fair ended was a closing party just a couple of blocks away. And it was like, it really was.
In front of the jewel. Where the eyeball is.
Yeah, it really was like,
let me cake.
No, but I know exactly what you're talking about, because I went there one time and was like, I can't go into this thing dressed like this.
It was weird too, because by that point, all the galleries were exhausted, the artists were exhausted. You've been schmoozing for 3 days, you know, you're trying to make sales, you're trying to like sustain your programming for a year. And so it was very, and the galleries don't have time to go home, change, get ready, get freshened up, eat. So it was clearly like, this is just for Dallas socialites. All the galleries were kind of by themselves, talking a little bit, but like everyone was tired, you know, and then no artists were there. There was maybe a handful.
But so I mean, it's a club, you know. I mean,
it's a free club.
And you watch something like Clara McAndrew's video on the art world, you know, the art market and where it's going, and tomorrow, and you start to realize. You know, the people there are big players, and they have lots of money, and they have lots of, and they're like big game hunters, and they're on a strata that floats, you know, up here.
But they weren't in that.
But
they weren't in that one. No.
But
they wouldn't be seen.
Yeah, they probably already come in and done their damage and gone on to whatever. And so you have.
They have croissant walls.
They have croissant walls.
But I want to throw this at you, which is, you know, like working for a year and a half with Rick Lowe over on the Victory Meadow project, on the Nasher project with Nasher funding, and taking that money and bringing that out and getting all the attention and all the media coverage that we were able to get. And it, you know, certainly it was controversial, and people don't really understand what social sculpture is or social practice necessarily is, but because it had the auspices of the backing of the Nasher and Rick Lowe's variety and all of that came along with it. And by the time that ran its course, when, you know, we had all the stakeholders in there, to now that we have instigated something and shown a need for it and put a program together and call the stakeholders in that could contribute to it, everything from the councilwoman Skates to, you know, architects and et cetera, urban planners, and you know, everybody's like, yeah, but nobody will give you the money, not a drop, you know, and so the whole thing just goes, you know, and it's not something, you know, that's on its feet by that time, but it's something that's really sexy in name and in affiliation and all of that, but in terms of actually really, you know, instituting something that is going to create change and use art as a change agent and capitalize on a globalized cultural element of the city.
Why is that? I mean, that's a project that we funded and supported in San Antonio and in Houston. So what is it in Dallas where we keep hitting these roadblocks? Why is it Dallas? What's that?
It's more conservative.
It's very
You don't have, like you have in San Antonio, you don't have a layer under the very rich that are liberal. And so if you're going to go for social programs and you're an arch conservative, you're going to do that. We got a lot of really hardcore conservative people in art.
Yeah.
How does that change?
You know the best thing people want for a sculpture here? You know, for a library? A mother, a father, 2 children out of their mind, sitting on a bench reading.
Where's the mistress seated?
Yeah.
Where's the mistress seated?
He.
Right. He's buying cigarettes.
So do you think there's a shift between, like, I mean, we keep talking about the art fair, right? And that's not really, that's the art market and that's art objects. I mean, we start talking about social practices, art, right? These are 2 completely different things, and maybe Dallas completely understands funding objects on your wall. You know, maybe it's different when you start thinking about funding something that's really nebulous. And maybe that's part of it, is that when donors do contribute, they often want a physical thing with their name on it. You very seldom have people donating to uphold sort of like a job or a position or just funding that will just supplement, which is the whole thing too, like Tom and Francis's piece, is there should be a program in place to maintain those works, those public works. And there's nothing really existing for that. So you're willing to buy it when you get the sexy object, but not the upkeep of it, not all the invisible labor. And I think, you know, it's like Greg Chalette's book, where he talks a lot about that sort of, I don't know, we put all this energy and passion into things, and it becomes invisible, and it just disappears, because we can, we're in a capitalist society, so anything you care about, you'll never get paid for. It's only the things you don't care about that people value. So there ends up being this kind of shift between the object and the actual passion.
I mean, on the wall, it does say that Dallas is the capital city. So we just talked about that last week and print a lot, actually.
What Ryder's talking about makes me equate it with like a pro-life movement, and the way that, like, if you've enjoyed a sex life, you should be punished for it. And if you have passion about your art, you don't need to be compensated for it. Again, you need to suffer for it. Like, what is that?
Is that different than in other times? It isn't different than in other times. One of the opportunities for groups that, like we are, cutting edge, how cutting it is, I don't know, but in Forward is that we are able to tap small aficionados, okay? And they're out there. They're giving to other people right now, okay? So we will never get maybe the big money you're talking about, okay?
I don't know if I'm talking big, I'm just go big. Yeah, go big or go home with access, right?
I guess I would just say kind of 3 things from my perspective. One is, I think part of the issue is that donor class, collector class, and funder class in Dallas don't value artists. 2 is that there's a kind of, like, if you compare like the amount of money given by the trustee class, right, that's comparable, and in many cases outpaces you know, what happens in other cities, similar cities in size to Dallas, where we trail is in corporate and municipal funding, right? And once again, there's a value thing that goes there. And then 3 is that, you know, I think that there's also kind of more of a disconnect amongst artists in Dallas in engaging with the city. I think part of it is because it has been an abusive relationship. So of course, why would you kind of pull away in that environment? But, when you kind of, not that any of these places are perfect or all trying to figure it out, but when you kind of see how much more intertwined culture is and artists are in certain, kind of aspects of the city, of civic engagement, and people who are like very actively fighting to make that happen in various cities, because nothing power doesn't relinquish itself. I think those are just 3 thoughts that are out there.
That is actually something certainly.
But in all those cities that have these vibrant communities where artists have some say,
What Shreveport?
all kinds of places, okay? But shut up. Anyway, but what if it always has to do with a lack of segregation of space? What if it always has to do with building a community that is devoted that has affordable housing, when people want to move in, and the artists are there? I mean, maybe one thing we have in Dallas, we have too many of these segregated, separate places without enough density to call it an artist place.
I hear that, but I don't disagree with that, but I would also say that as creatives, I think, and I'll speak for myself, as a creative in Dallas, there are places or parts of the city that I do not normally go or seek out, even though theoretically those parts of the city would be very affordable and have lots of access, but that is not where I go, and I think that reflects a larger civic issue, and so I think there are probably opportunities that we don't take advantage of as a creative class in the city, particularly when I definitely think our biggest asset is space. That we have space in abundance compared to other cities where that's a premium. But it's where's that space and how do we go and not go places is part of the kind of larger equation. Because that reflects politically, Sylvia, right? Like the people against arts funding are often Black city council people, right? Why? Because they don't see creativity. They don't see the people in this, not necessarily in this room, but in our communities, right? Necessarily there. And not saying that there aren't people who don't do that work. I'm just saying that there's not a mass of people who do that work out on our fingers.
Dara, do you think that we could have one of those places that was designated as significant, okay, where you have the artists are usually there first, and then, what do you call them, avant-garde people, I don't know, start moving in. Of course, we always move the artists out eventually. But is there something that we don't have? We have this, we have the Cedars, we have, down by whatever, and we have all these different little teeny places, and they don't even talk to each other half the time. There's not even a consortium or an informal council of these districts that could just accumulate. So we have nothing like out in Mexico City or Prague or anywhere where you have a congregation of people. And there's got to be some push, and it might be because we have too much space.
Can I speak to that momentarily?
Yes.
As a North Texan, well, because I think it's a really valid point. I think that point, and also speaking on Dallas, the perspective of Dallas as like a capital city, right, like how there's this kind of header to like all conversations of Dallas, like there's resources and money, space here, you know, and yet why are they not connected? In my experience from North Central Texas, Arlington at UTA, and then here for 2 years, like none of those things really seem specific to Dallas much at all. They manifest themselves because in a different way because there is so much capital here, but it gets distributed kind of weirdly compared to the rest of America, like everyone says. I don't have experience pretty much anywhere outside of North Texas, so I can only speak from that perspective. But, yeah, like it seems like people in general, the like tone of the arts conversations that like it is secondary, it is not tied to industry, you know, it's not, and it's just not something, you talk about it in terms of commodifying it, like that, it's pretty heavy-handed in my opinion, in my experience, like, you know, at this early point of entering an art career or something, and having gone to art school specifically. So my point is that I don't see it as being specific to Dallas. It's really specific to my experience in North Texas, North Central Texas.
Yeah.
I've kind of had a hard time finding peers in general that want to work in some kind of community-oriented way. And I have found it in Dallas, but again, it's the most abundant here than any other place I've lived. But there still is that disconnect of like how it kind of cycles in and out independently in its own little microcosm.
I think the conversation I've had a lot here with artists that are living and working in Dallas is, I'm not going to be here very long. I'm not going to be here very long. It's too hard to stay. I'm not going to be here very long. And yeah, that is a problem, and I can see why. I mean, just me coming here and being here for 2 weeks, to not produce a show, I don't know how many roadblocks I hit. Like, you know, just to not produce a show, but to publish like basically free content in a magazine about not producing a show. And so I kind of got, at one point I was like, oh, I get it. I get why it's hard. And then I went to this art fair party, which was like, oh, I really get it. You know? So yeah, that is a problem, and that's not a problem that's specific to Dallas. That problem happened in Austin.
But I think in a way, it's well, definitely it's been a blessing that we've had to cancel the show because it's opened this up,
yeah.
Which is I'm sure the show is interesting, and the show you pitched is interesting and valuable and brings up. But this is so vital to all of our existences.
And that's part of my practice too, is really listening to the issues that are at hand and responding to them. And so I realized, like, the show, yes, could happen, it can be great, it can be wonderful, we can speak on migrations and movement, geography, but this is the issue at hand that's more important for the community, which is where we went, like, why we did this, essentially.
So Dallas forced this intervention
Dallas
on itself because it was spending too much money on parties and not enough on taking artists to lunch.
Well, I think too, like an example of something like a mobilizing effort is what happens in Houston. I think it's like 2 or 3 times a year where they do what they called community meetings, kind of like old school town hall meetings with the arts community. And it's kind of like this format basically, where you sit and you take like a status of the arts in Houston and what can we do and how can we work together. But then I think that also comes from like the history of community engagement that Houston has in the arts, which is things like Project Row Houses and Manila. Right, and yeah.
Because all of those, I mean, grouped together, we don't have really, I mean, we came close with La Reunion and the idea of having a residency that was kind of, it offered a place for people to buy into, you know, that could give money. And I think that you have to have something set up that is, you know, shows that it's going to be a sustainable kind of, you know, part of the ecology. A lot of what happens is they look around and they go, wow, I'm looking on Art and Seek and I see that we have like 350 art venues here in the city, you know, so man, it's never been better. You know, what they don't know is that they have 2 people running a gallery with 25 stable, you know, 25 artists in their stable, And, you know, and those two people are taking out the trash and not making a living for those artists. I mean, they're making, so every artist has to have 3 jobs. And Dallas is good about providing temporary labor. You know, but it's one of those things that if you're in a building, like, you know, if you're in a building downtown and you're hanging a show, you know, as part of a nonprofit gallery, you are probably the only person in that building not being paid that day. You know, I mean, it's like you are the only one in there working for free. And, you know,
You know, Greg, I don't know if you know about this, but there's this kind of secret grocery store where artists can go, and you don't really need money. You just, just go get it all the time.
What's it?
They also, you can bring your electricity bill in there, they'll take care of it. Yeah, you can get furniture there. You know, I wanted to bring something up. I met Mallory this week. She'd come to our drawing group, Children of Artemis, on Wednesday, and William introduced me to her. And Mallory had this idea that she wanted to try something like developing an artist residency, but it's like a single one. And just maybe out of her apartment or something. It was so how do we like take that spark of inspiration to do something in the city and actually like find a way to support it before Mallory moves on to Boston or San Francisco, you know, and says like, I couldn't make anything happen in Dallas.
Yeah.
Everyone's quiet.
Mallory, if you want to talk any about, you can. I don't want to put you on the spot.
Well, it's just really timely. William and I have been talking about just, we both live in East Dallas. We've been there almost 2 years. And how that change is looking, and we know the art scene is alive and vibrant, but there's, again, that lack of cohesion. And also, you know, housing affordability is a big issue, and East Dallas and Bellum and these areas that are being highly developed right now is where all my artist friends live, and the rent is getting cranked up there. So, you know, and how do you address that in looking forward in 5 years or so that they're being completely pushed to Richardson, Oak Cliff, or something like that? Anyways, so I lived.
You're not going to be pushed to Oak Cliff. It's already been.
Yeah, it's further, you know, somewhere else. So when I went to grad school for social work in Austin, and I lived in a co-op for a semester, and I was really surprised to not see any co-op things at all in Dallas. And in Austin, it's a pretty vibrant community. I mean, this was student housing, but basically a co-op is owned by a corporation, and the members are shareholders as part of it. But so I had this vision of having a place where artists would live and work in East Dallas. That's where this is all coming from.
And that's 500X initiated itself as that, and they bought into that building. And so you had artists that came in and actually purchased that building. This is before Gibson, and they owned the building, and they were in co-op.
Yeah. 500X.
And then eventually, you know, they ended up selling it to David Gibson, who made them and then gave under the condition that they could keep the gallery going, etc. And so, you know, anyway, that's how Rick Loeb has gotten on the map, is because he beat the gentrification rule, which is like you can't. I mean, I've been in five areas that have now become gentrified, you know, over the course of 30 years. And I've watched, you know, this from Bishop, you know, being the first one in Bishop Arts, to being in the Cedars, to being in the parking lot with the Perot Museum now. I used to be my studio, and so, you know, I've watched this. You know, there was always a cheap studio, but, you know, you never had any purchase there. I mean, there was never. So collectively, if you can do this again, I mean, it works. I mean, it's the only way that you can.
So artists need to position themselves economically so that they can own property, invest in property, is really kind of like the first step in sustaining your life as an artist. Sylvia's shaking her head no.
Well, and you.
Andrew?
I was wondering, as following along these lines, has the city of Dallas ever had this group out in Minneapolis called Art Space for Them?
Yeah.
And talk about their work?
They have.
Because they've sort of created a model that's been replicated in cities all across the country, which actually creates this model, this co-op model of artist ownership of studio live workspace. And if they have, that's a model that's there, that's work that can be applied to areas of the grounds.
What you might look at is the county as opposed to the city. And the county, Dallas County, is suddenly getting involved in housing. And it is in South Dallas, and it's in Oak Cliff. But I follow through the newspapers in terms of what they do. But I've noticed that they've gotten more involved in that. And that may be a place where you can actually, the county judge there, Jenkins, seems to be very involved in that. I know they're working with a developer right now, but they did some things in terms of reducing tax rates on Cliff to encourage development. But it's just started. It's been in the last 6 months. And in terms of UTD funding, I noticed that just recently the state of Texas had done a large increase into their funding. So it may have been that right now they have, or in the coming fiscal cycle, they'll have more money than they've had in the past simply because money's coming through now. It wasn't there before. But all kinds of things pop across my screen, and I don't have any peculiar or particular knowledge of them, just that they are happening.
Well, that money,
there's something that could be worth pursuing.
If you go out there, you see where all that money's going. It's like they're building buildings all over campus. And that's.
There's a big development there, But like I said, they just got a huge boost in their funding this year because I give a shit. So I follow what they're doing in terms of their funding.
Every meeting that we have, every meeting that we have in the arts and humanities always starts out with the dean getting up and saying, well, the bad news is we don't have any money. The good news is, we all have a job, kind of thing. And that's expected.
Well, guys, let's be real about this too, okay? Artists are always like the canary in the mine. Right. They always lead the way to the cheap housing, the place where you're going to live cheap. Because I think all over the world, this is what happens. As artists, especially starting out, you don't have money, you find the places we congregate, other people find us exciting and interesting. If we have a vibrant community, and this is the thing we're lacking, people start to move in, prices go up, and then we have to look at other places to live. Some places like Kansas City actually give artists subsidies for rent and allow them to take them to the new place they go, okay? So there's ways, but something in our vibrancy doesn't have that accumulation or sufficient numbers to create that kind of district.
If I could say something, having been here forever,
Yeah, me too.
back in the 70s, everything pretty much flowed out of North Texas University, right? Music and visual artists and everything else, plus, everything was run down, and we all went to the Army-Navy store to buy surplus clothes to wear when we were all in fashion, all in high style. But right now, what I see going on, and at least in terms of jazz musicians, is I see that type of energy again. We're seeing a lot of young guys who have been out of North Texas, out of Denton for a few years, suddenly hitting the scene again. And it's becoming a very, and jazz musicians are different from I think any other kind of musician, because it's a real brotherhood. It's an underappreciated art form, and it really is a high art form. But these guys are coming together and they're doing some great stuff. But there is this great community, because you will have guys who live in different cities that come together and do a one-night gig, and it's because they're all connected, you know, through the network that they form. But it's taken years. It's been years. It's been neglected since, you know, since I guess the late '70s. The jazz scene pretty much died in Dallas, but it's coming back now, in a way that it hasn't before. And part of that is the money, but part of it is also the number of young people that you've got that are coming out of the university system. And I think in terms of having some sort of vibrant art scene, or really kind of any scene, you have to have young people coming to the area from someplace that's within that. All my kids stayed in cities that they went to school in, right? Not one of them lives in Dallas. And that's pretty much, I think, what happens. But I think that's why Austin has always been such a great scene for anything.
No. Sorry.
No?
I love Austin.
You know, I've been going to Austin since 1972, getting 18-cent gallons of gas and makeup.
Artists cannot afford to live there anymore.
Well, all right, they moved out, but there was a time.
And there's a recycling of ideas that happens over and over and
Well,
over and over.
it's
And
also,
there's no criticality, there's no writing.
It's a tech hub now. So maybe art has changed, and because it is a different type of animal. But really what happened to Austin was you had the tech firms that moved in there, and that really changed the culture, or it changed the way people interacted, and really kind of the focus of art. But I was going down there in '72, you know, to party and
I mean, I'm from there originally, and it's a
Are
totally
you?
different city. I'm originally from there. I did my master's at UT. I work there all the time.
Well,
I've
got a daughter down there now.
Let's switch directions just for a second and go back to, I know Andrew had something to say that we didn't get to.
I wanted to say that we're in an interesting time period, this interesting window that's about to close, that if artists can take advantage of it, we're going to miss out on a golden opportunity. And a lot of it's related to like the housing crisis, which means that there is a lot of product that's on the market very cheap. And combine that with things like the HEART program that's been created for first-time home buyers, which will allow them to get into an ownership stake. And that's the key. You got to get into an ownership stake. Everything else you would think of. And combine that, and they really need to have a developer here at the table. As much, you know, we got to have those people here because they understand the critical mass numbers that make these things work. And you have to go into these things with a clear understanding of the critical mass numbers that you need to make these work. So when you bring your ideas to a banker, they understand and they can rely on it. But if we don't take advantage of this market, this real estate market right now, and that's why all this development's going on, because it's basically blood in the water. You know, product's never been this cheap. And it's a golden opportunity for artists, you know, to get in as well at different levels and to work with HEART programs and things that are set up there to get an ownership stake that will sustain them over the next 10 to 15 years.
A lot of it's investments though, because I've been, especially in the Dallas area, almost everything that was available, you know, 3 years ago at a reasonable price got bought up by investors and went off the market. I think where you have to look is someplace like Denison, Texas, where everything is foreclosed, and I don't know, you know, I've driven through Denison, Texas. I know that they've got an awful lot of property that reminds me of a lot of the Swiss Avenue area and the old East Dallas area, because I've had cruising on the internet. But because it's all foreclosed, and there's
that's
the whole city's
foreclosed,
foreclosed,
right?
Yeah,
hold on, sorry. I disagree with that. I agree with the first half of what you said about ownership. You know, I mean, like the studio practice that I am a co-partner in, you know, at Studios over here, we own, you know, that land and Fair Park, right? And that's super intentional. That's why I'm housing my social practice project in that project, right? But and you know, it's like you can still get housing level in $15,000-$20,000 in South Dallas. Like that's available, right? The problem is no one wants it. Well, I would say cultural equity is part of it. Part of it is that you are going to have to like not be by all your friends. Part of it is, you know, like there's a reason why it's affordable in that way, because it's decades and decades of neglect from a public policy standpoint. I mean, there's lots of reasons why it gets that low, but if people want it, and the thing where when it comes to like investor space, like I mean, you can look at some of the most successful areas right now in Dallas, right? Like those weren't planned areas. Design district wasn't planned, right? Nancy Whitenet went there in 2002. It was called crazy for leaving, right? And then other and now we're like, you know, a decade plus later, it's cycling to other areas inside of that. But that was, and investors came in on the back end of that, right, and bought it up, and now it will be much more of a planned, you know, branded area, but that's not how it started. I mean, in similar ways with Bishop Arts, from my understanding. So, you know, I mean, I just want to say that I think artists are very smart people, or some of the smartest people. I have tremendous faith in them. And to get back to kind of your quandary, you know, it's like, I think ownership, if there's enough people who see value in that, then it becomes, you know, figuring out, and maybe, and Greg, I'm going to turn to Greg because I kind of use Greg for some of my kind of historical memories since I don't have that, but you know, like, those efforts have happened in the past right here in terms of co-ops, in terms of people banding together. There is an opportunity. What is to stop that from happening now if there's that will? And I'm interested in that conversation.
Well, where are your people coming from now? I mean, there's supposedly Dallas population is growing, right? Where are the people coming from? And you know, what are their interests? What do you see in the areas that you're living in your life? You know, what's going on? I mean, we talk about artist co-ops, artists coming together. You know, I see a little bit of it in the jazz scene in terms of younger people coming in that weren't here 5 years ago. But and that's just an observation from the outside.
They're stuck here because of they're stuck here because of the student loans though. That's why it's a different because they have $30,000-$40,000 of student loan debt, and so wherever they move, Dallas is affordable, so they come down 45 minutes down the road.
So can I throw out something
Yes.
too, and point off of what Daryl was talking about, which, okay, if we're all smart and innovative and intelligent, and we have these existing models, and we're looking at all these models in all these other places, yet and we're claiming that our scene isn't very vibrant, and we somehow need more density, and we need all these things, maybe we don't, right? Because we're not doing it. And so we have the ability, we have all this information, maybe we don't actually want this community. That could be something to sort of bring up, is that we keep talking about how we could be like everyone else, but maybe we aren't like everyone else, and we shouldn't even try to be like everyone else. I think I've been here maybe 5 or 6 years. Every year there's 2 or 3 things about the state of the arts and how we need to be like somebody else, and we never do it. But we have all the resources. If we really want community, we can pull together at any point, but maybe we don't like being separate. Maybe we like this disparate nature, and then we just sort of claim to want community. we could have it if we wanted it at any given point.
That relates to the point I was trying to make earlier about being from rural North Texas and kind of seeing a general weird disconnect between like patrons and like city interaction with the arts. You know, like I completely agree with that because it's like I remember growing up in like you know, semi-rural Cleburne, South Fort Worth. Like all my friends were affluent. I didn't know any poor people. I didn't know. I had a very diverse exposure to like different ethnicities or cultures or even neighborhoods. But no one ever wanted to explore or, you know, like do anything other than like watch TV or pay to go watch TV or pay to go watch a movie or go buy like franchised food. And I just remember being like, I mean, you know, me and my siblings did artsy things. We like self-identified as like creative individuals. And we weren't even very affluent at that time. And so it's just like, you know, moving from there, you know, going to college to, you know, further my career and my life and shit, and then coming to Dallas for the purpose of like being employed and interacting with the community. Like I said earlier, I have the most access to an art community that I've ever seen, and yet there is this underlying conversation of segregation in whatever aspect you want to approach it. And I completely agree with that. But it's like, okay, well then maybe it is the way it is because that's the way it is. So like,
what's the center of your community? What brings the people together?
You can look at it socioeconomically. It's a very diverse set of income levels. I'm one of the few ones that has a full-time job. I can say that.
No, but where do you interact? Where is it?
It's on the internet, on Facebook. On the internet, I was going to say, that's our virtual community, which is taking place in our physical. I live in Greenville, all my friends are
We might be in a post-modern global society, right? If you talk about local standardization and you talk about how it's spread, we might be right in the midst of all of it, right? There is no need to physically connect anymore unless you have physical desires or physical needs.
And I would pose a question to Hyde. How do you feel about that being a director in the space? What do you mean?
Well, it is interesting.
Maybe you want this one.
Yeah. I mean, there's no substitute for being in the same house. But there are also times when I put a sign on my door that says, don't knock unless it's an emergency. Because I've had enough of everybody. I mean, not that anybody here is taxing, but just I need my own space. You know?
You're running your own expenses. Like you know, you have expenses too. That's how we started. Well, that's, you interjected at the beginning of the conversation about looking at $500 to $11,000 for a season.
Well, there's social and emotional expenses too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, maybe having community is awesome, and maybe it's not.
But you need quiet time too.
Yeah.
For most art practices.
One thing that's actually happened that's been really interesting is that by canceling the exhibition, I've become more tied to being in the space and in the gallery. Because if had the exhibition happened, I could, you know, just come in for a public program, but I don't use Dallas as a hub to travel other places. But now I have to be here every weekend for these sessions because, it takes, it's hard work to work with community and it's hard work to work collaboratively. You know?
Yeah. It would have been much easier to make a Facebook page.
Totally.
To say like, there it is. See you suckers. But yeah, being here and now it's like something you have to water
Invest
every
in,
week.
yeah. Which goes back to the investment. How invested are we?
And what your art is your art community building? Is your art about making something else? Or stripping? Like Sylvia's cue. It's like
I don't know. Like we were talking a lot about the art fair early on, and that is a reflection of Dallas. And if that's what a lot of the artists here see Dallas as, then maybe they're here because they're trying to make a certain type of work, and maybe that work doesn't need community. You know, I don't know. These are just playing devil's advocate. I don't really know.
Yeah, maybe we have these romantic notions about our community, like the Weimar Republic and pre-war Germany, and like what a vital place Berlin was and how it changed the world, but also it caused conservatives to, you know, freak out and try to kill everybody that was creative.
Can we ask Ronald to talk a little bit about the community building where he is? Or just
So Sylvia's asking if you want to compare.
So I cannot compare it maybe correctly, but as far as I can see, it's mostly the same in terms of segregation and what's the term, getting higher by moving first artists and then the creative people and then what's the gentrification. That's almost the same in Hamburg. But there is a difference. I can only speak for Hamburg very well. There are 5 or 6 so-called artist houses run by the community. So they bought or rented houses and gave studio space and living space to artists. It's good, that sounds great. So I was there for 9 or 10 years in one of the houses, and we had an exhibition space almost of this size, and we had money to run exhibitions, but the same problems you were talking about. Very little money, but we had money. But the problem is, if you don't have let's say a rule to get the artists out of the house, to get younger people in, they stay there until they are 80. So that's not the solution of it.
Right.
But this is, nevertheless, this is part of the Hamburg art community. So they meet and they fight each other because this one is better than the other, and this is silly and has also quite good results.
Kind of came up where I was talking a little bit about Latin America and the history of the arts in Latin America, and part of that too is that there was a history of socialism in Latin America, and so there was this trickle-down effect to support people on multiple levels, right? And so that really affected how arts are funded as well, is that history of like funding cultural patrimony and history in that way. And that's kind of the reference that I'm coming from, because I've been in Mexico for 10 years, and sort of seeing these grants happen that support artists for their entire careers. We get one, which is great. But the only example that we have of something like that in the States, which is actually a really good example, is WPA. What happened to it? Like, what happened to it? The WPA, Works Projects.
But that's how Fair Park was actually built in the 30s.
So kind of get through the economic depression and give jobs to artists.
It was a socialist team.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what
You gave it as an example one of the grants and the amount, what was it? It's profound.
It's called the Fonca, and there's actually two Foncas that you can get. It's artists that are between the age of 22 and 30, I think, because it's a really big one. And then there's another grant that you can apply for artists that are the age of 35 to like 80, however, whatever. And it provides, for the younger artists, it's like $3,000 a month for 3 years just to work on one project. And for the younger artists, those projects then travel all over the country in exhibitions. And so every year there's an exhibition of the Fonca grantees. Or maybe the younger artists only get 1 year. I think the younger artists get 1 year and a mentor and a project. And then they travel the whole second year with the grants as well. So they pay them to work 1 year and then they pay them to travel the second year. The other, if you're above the age of 30, whatever it is, you get $3,000 a month for 3 years just to focus on one project. Now within that you have certain deliverables, of course, but that's really broad. I mean, you have to make deadlines, you have to meet deadlines, you have to show that you've met these deadlines, etc. But it can be.
And how many artists, how many grants are you?
I don't know exactly the amount, but it's significant. And it's visual artists, dancers, singers, performers, it's across the board. I know 5 artists that I just know within my circle that have gotten it over this last cycle.
You know, so the national just came up with their national grants, right? So $100,000 to one artist for 1 year, right? It's kind of cool. I mean, $3,000 a month, that's $36,000 a year. So basically $100,000 spread out over 3 years, given to sort of maybe more local or regional artists. Started thinking about the shift and the impact from recognizing somebody who's already at a high level of the game to actually to see this shift in programming and what that could possibly do for the city, instead of what it could do for somebody who's, I mean, if they give us a word like Amish Kapoor or something, I'm gonna be like, so what? Like,
Yes.
he gets
But it's like what
SMU in my next car.
But SMU would have $50,000 and they would give it to Rauschenberg. They would give it to Cristo, or they would give it to, and they would.
but not anymore.
Thank goodness.
Along those lines.
But it makes a difference.
Yeah.
To make that change.
They've talked about, like it would be good for CentralTrak to get artists of higher profiles. The thing is, what we have to offer here is, it's very valuable for an artist in a certain position, but like a big artist who's running a workshop somewhere else or in 3 different places, like this is a hotel room for them. They're not going to do work here. They're not going to engage with the community. They're going to be traveling to other shows. So it's a great resource for a particular type of artist, but not for high profile.
But it doesn't have to be high profile, but you have to pick really good artists. Because where you're getting your reputation as well, is that you're getting what I hear now.
No pressure, Ryan.
Yeah. But what I'm hearing right now is how happy they are of mixing people from the outside with people on the inside. That's the big benefit you're getting. I have one other thing to say. All of these things we're talking about on the people who are from places that work, government does have a significant part in that. And one of the things about Dallas is we're talking now about art. We give zip, okay? And the amount of money that we give in the city of Dallas got hard for like the Office of Cultural Affairs, $70 million. Sounds like a great amount, okay? $3 million to $4 million is grants to organizations. The rest is either to fund buildings, to pay for utilities. So the amount of anything you're doing new is almost zero. It makes no impact. We have a position in the city of Dallas that in the bylaws say you have to maintain organizations, okay, over time if they're good. So that means, like the last 7 years, we had no additional revenue. You keep everyone who's been around forever. You have no place for people who are new, but you don't want to get rid of your good people either. So right now, there is nobody who talks to city council, no one that forces our mayor from right door to actually do more, okay? So what we have is all of us sort of write them off, okay? There is a new program by which I'll talk about next week or sometime for emerging sculptors, and then young ones as people who haven't done public commissions. A new round of selecting those people who will be, can be chosen for public art in Dallas, starts in May. So you should call OCA, get your application in for your sculpture. But anyway, I don't see anyone pushing government. I don't see advocacy, I don't see activism.
When we had
except for you.
The water. I mean, Daryl.
Occasionally.
I think part of the problem you're talking about, or part of the reason for it, is that government's dismantling. And it's been a problem. What they do when they privatize everything is they remove it from government oversight is what they do. And everything belongs to a contractor. And you see it I worked for the county for 10 years, all right, and was there when Dallas County went from being a Democratic county to a Republican county overnight with Ronald Reagan, all right? Everyone switched parties like that. They all became diehard Republicans. But what happened was suddenly you had complete privatization, or the movement to privatize all government functions. And what happened as a result of that, or what I see has happened, is that government has become dysfunctional. And you want this government support and this activism from an entity that has spent the last generation trying to take itself apart.
Having also been in government and politics as council person or a legislator gets 15 calls, they think there's a landslide. I think government has been allowed to do what it does, and corporations have been allowed to do what it does, because all of us say, I don't like government, there's nothing I can do. If I talk to one more person that says I don't do X, Y, and Z, I have no participation, what is that little thing? You get the kind of government you deserve?
Well, that's it. No, I think you're right there. And part of that, what you have to do is you have to distinguish between capitalism and democracy. And what has happened over the last 30 years is capitalism is getting all the publicity. Everything is animal spirits. Everything is government is bad. If you've missed it, I'm sorry. Being an old government politics guy, I pay attention, right? And so what's happened is our society has made this move from being a democracy, a government based on democracy,
Okay, so
to a government based on capitalism, all right, and the free market.
Is which one of you is going to join me in my chain game? I don't know what we should chain ourselves to, but if I can have all of you, I would just think of one thing, we can chain ourselves to something and get something.
Oh no, I want to just work for free. I thought it was that kind of chain gang.
Right. I would rather chain sculpture to one of the bridges. Let's do it. I've done it already. Let's do it again.
Oh, you want to
Let's do it again.
Give me your name.
Well, with the, I mean, just a good example is with Francis and Tom's Water Theater. The people who showed up, the artists that showed up, really, you know, suddenly the Arts Commission went, wow, artists showing up who really care about something, you know, and they had really never seen that kind of support. They had the usual people coming in and, you know, and advocating for their programs, but they hadn't really seen, you know, support like that, that also brought out Jeremy Strick and, you know, and different people who could make a difference. And it didn't, I mean, it ended in some compromise somehow, but, you know, it's really disheartening when you see somebody like the Nasher and, you know, and their budget and what they do to give a measly $5,000 that they split up between 5 artists, where 75 artists are applying for a $1,000 thing, you know, it's like, that's, you know, and then the city comes up with a parking meter scam where they're going to have people decorate parking meters for $50 a piece. They're going to give them $500, and when you pare it down, that's $50 a piece.
Spray paint.
You can't do that. It has all these. You can't just spray paint it. It's got.
So artists are decorative now?
Andrew wanted to
Yeah, but this
It has
is
been one of the most popular things that anyone's ever done.
But-
So it's just one every day.
but that's the idea. An artist can't make a living doing that, you know. And you know this idea.
Andrew wanted to say something.
The political dimension of this is to not be ignored.
It's not what?
The political dimension of this, what you were talking about was right on point. Because I found that in other states that I've lived in, that the cultural, what we call like the cultural coalition, is probably one of the most diverse coalitions that you'll find in any city, any state, demographically, according to incomes, according to race, according to like jobs and things like this. But at some level, that needs to be organized so that when people at the state and local level are talking about cutting programs, they're talking about not funding cultural programs at a significant level, these voters can mobilize. And it's really incredible to see the state of Ohio, where I live, is so active in this realm. They were talking about like slashing the Ohio Arts Council budget by like 80%. And what they found was that there were like rural communities in Ohio that were like, back off of that, you know, because we lose that. we lose the only cultural programming that we have in this area. You have these urban cities like Cleveland, where you have like this incredible Democratic, Republican, rich, poor, ethnically diverse coalition that can mobilize and through the council and through some other city organizations, begin sending letters, begin doing calls, begin going and like doing lobbying efforts at the State House. Those politicians back right now with the quickness. And so there has to be like that part of the game where the cultural community is organized across the board and plays these political electoral games in order to get the things that they want within their community.
What they have to rush to vote.
Yeah.
But I can tell you when this, I want to go back to real quickly, go back to Ryder's comment about Dallas not being, like maybe Dallas doesn't want this. And ever since I've been here, I was always told, Dallas is just a city that, you can't organize its artists. And when we did, I got a thing together and organized 400 artists to come together and boycott the DMA's Artist Ball and make demands, and then also that was when all the NEA controversy was happening.
When was this in the 80s?
This was in 90.
90.
And we had, we organized, and this is when Dick Armey and Jesse Helms were attacking the NEA. And we organized 400 artists with picket signs and everything out, and we had the mayor there, we had everybody there, we put on this whole thing, and out of that, we got the Texas Artist Fund, we got artists invited to the ball if they participated, we actually got an artist on the board at the museum at that time. That's since
so it's probably time we do this again.
So what happened was, people showed up, and if people show up, and you have, we got banners, and we had poster parties and everything, out of that came the map. We took that, we got our own space, and then we didn't have money to really run the space. And then we got picked up, but Rick came to our cause, and then Claude, and then, and then anyway, it developed into the map. So things can happen, and there was a chance to maybe organize that with the healthcare issue, because that's something that involves every artist, and so we were hoping, and when we gathered for that, we only had like 200 people maybe, or 150, 200 people show up for that, but they had all the police in riot gear behind the buildings because artists were gathering and they didn't know what was going to happen.
Yeah, well, wait, yeah.
So is this a point then where we do say the show does not go on?
And so you do have to organize. If you could find some element to organize around, you can get some attention in this town, and you can make some things happen. But like Sylvia says, if you don't, if you're not, the same thing with everything else, if you don't think that you can make a difference, and if you don't organize to do that, if you're not going to, pool your money and your resources and buy a chunk of land and put up a Butler building for not much and start a compound, you can do all
So we have to figure out a way to make certain demands without alienating people that are already supporting us.
What you do is you vote. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What you do is you vote.
Yeah.
You get people that are sympathetic. And the turnout for elections is so small that you can really make a huge impact by vetting the people that are running.
Yeah.
It's absolutely.
But are our needs even on a ballot? Or do we need to hire a lobbyist?
There's not on anybody's agenda. So the thing is, you've got, there's opportunity with the county. There's opportunity with the county because they're sympathetic to some things. All right? There's a city election coming up, you know, in next month. You know, so it's the great thing about the Hispanic artists is that they are organized, and there's a tight community in Oak Cliff. I mean, it's amazing. They actually communicate with one another. All right, and they do a lot of things, and it's I mean, everything from part-time jobs to work projects for involving kids. But they got involved with politics, and you have to do that. And the biggest problem you have, all the things you're talking about, you want support from municipalities, you want support from the state. All these things are run by politicians. And if you look at redistricting, part of this is just being able to vote in a district where you've got some pull. And you look at how gerrymandering has changed the political map of the state. It's incredible. You see a lot of it going on, but you've got to get involved at a very, very basic level, and then let everything flow over and move from there.
Well, okay, there's a comment back here, but I also want to we've been going for almost 2 hours, so I want to bring it back to CentralTrak a bit.
Just real quick, moreover, I mean, just more than just voting is very important, I agree with you. But moreover, number one, the community exists. It's how effective is the community being right now? That's the question. And two, did anyone invite the city council to these conversations today? Did anyone invite the mayor? I mean, you know, how can we complain if we didn't invite them to these events? We're only targeting each other, and not, you know, we're not the people who need to hear it. So why aren't we inviting them to these conversations?
We need to create a channel through which we can communicate and collude to communicate not only problems, problems we have, as well as like, you know, where we can project our role in the solution. And, you know, I agree. I think, you know, a lot of other things that have been said are true. It's like, maybe we're not colluding to get these things done in the way we need to. There's plenty of reasons for that.
As far as like inviting the city council, we didn't, because I'm not connected to the city council, but looking at CentralTrak as like this entity within the university, yes, we have invited people in the university.
Yeah. Sylvia was actually on the Cultural Affairs Commission. That's close. Still. So,
you can tell me whatever you want. I would love to take whatever you say, and I don't think anyone will hear it, but that's just, but still, yeah.
That's not very encouraging.
I like the laws, okay?
Yeah, bringing it back to CentralTrak.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think one kind of area, keeping on that conversation of local support, where, you know, I think CentralTrak could potentially link into even more is right, like, and maybe it has, but you know, like you're in District 7, right? Like we're in the same district, right? Which is predominantly Southern Black district.
Who's 7? Who is your
Well, it's open now, but it was Carolyn Davis who was not, but and now, you know, there's actually like a handful. There's like some really good candidates running. I don't know who's going to win. I know who we're supporting. Like, you know, like I know that a lot of the people who come to CentralTrak, you know, are driving south to get here, and there's not a lot of people driving north to get here, right? And how does what is the thinking? Like, I'm sure you've thought, but yeah.
Could you have a CentralTrak without endangering yourself? But could you have that wonderful idea of an arts coalition, a small organization? You make it up initially until you start getting people that you call an arts coalition, and then you collate it. But could you have those kind of satellites? No. Just people that meet here initially, that you sort of become the focal point with Daryl's organization and other organizations where you start something. You all have done it before. I've certainly done it before.
We all.
We all.
You all?
You all. I prefer. But anyway, so, could that be it? Because the other thing that you really need here at CentralTrak, you need some friends group here too. You know, I don't know if the university allows it, but you need some advocate group for CentralTrak. Plus, one of the functions, and that doesn't have to be done by staff, it can be done by people who are there, can organize this as a meeting place some of the time for advocacy.
We would make
And
CentralTrak available for them. Yeah, of course.
I mean, you've already got the foundation happening right here in this room, you know.
I know it would be a shame if we all disbanded and nothing really took fire here. Yeah. But to you, Daryl, like about engaging District 7, it's sort of like engaging the campus too. It's like we're here, we have, you know, come on down, the door's open, but I don't know, you know, how to get people here other than invite them and make it a welcoming place.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I don't know how good what you coaching that.
What you do is you have you have a big, like, you know, you have a big social event here, but you don't have anything to feed them and nothing to give them,
right?
And nothing to, and then they come in and there's no art, and then you have them here and you say, they go, well, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say one thing to also think about is, particularly since this is a residency program, right, is, you know, like, I think engagement always has to be a two-way street, right? There's like one level where you end, I think that's actually the second level. The first level, particularly, in my opinion, from an institutional standpoint, is like the going out, and how often do the people who are here, who visit here, go out and do projects or engage with that community. Maybe it happens all the time,
I think that's a
but
really
maybe
good
it
point.
doesn't.
And as a criticism for myself, I haven't been to the university yet because I just got here. And so I really want to make that a priority this week because I can't have these conversations without even seeing the university as a part of it, right? So that's one thing I need to do. Later, actually, is go to the university.
You might try to the ISD in terms of starting some type of co-op art program. Yeah. They do so much. They have that, and I know the Hispanic community does a lot of them, and they certainly have the need. I know they're very big on their magnets, and I don't know what you know. I don't know this neighborhood particularly well. I don't know where their schools.
Something I'm a little afraid of is changing what CentralTrak is, and that like I don't think we're prepared to say like make this like an after school kind of come take classes here. I mean, not that that's a bad thing, but I think that that's an entirely different thing than what we're doing.
And the university wouldn't expect that.
And you'd need to hire an educator.
Yeah, right. And I know that that's a way to engage.
There's a program right now in the Cliff with a lady who's come through and she's building a sculpture, a public sculpture, and she's engaging the students in all aspects, like selecting the site, doing all parts of planning, all of the aspects of the project. And they're not coming, she's not coming to the school to work with them. They have to go to her. It's high school level. Okay. So, yeah.
You know who I think is probably great at this kind of engagement is Janelle Ingolstadt with MAP. And we do some collaborations with her in that sometimes we'll host an artist that she's working with and such. And that's sort of, because of our small staff and our limited resources, that's sort of as close as we get to social practices, is working with curators that curate social practices.
Well, that's a way to get on the map though as well. If you can start working with some of these elected officials especially that are well connected. I mean, they're all about social connectivity. Then you become an entity that piques people's interest. They see something so good coming from it.
Right now, there are 3 council people. I think it's only 3 that are left on the Arts and Culture and Libraries Committee. And there's still Kingston, Monica Alonso, and I think Jennifer Davis. So right now, if you did nothing more in your district, you call them. Later on, you get the new people, and that's a start place, but not the start place to get money. Okay, but it's a start place because Philip does have a big mouth, and he is looking for outside sources, particularly funds for the Convention Bureau, to have a permanent source of money for the artists. Yeah, there.
I was just going to say, next Saturday we're doing a pop-up early voting event outside of Centro West campus. We're still planning it. I've had some life happen to me, as you can tell by my little boot. So right behind that, we are doing it, and it'll be a collaboration between anyone who wants to collaborate. Right now, the people who are on board is ArtCon, Art Love Magic, and Throw Magazine. Yeah.
Hey, we're going to wrap up just because it's been a good period of time, but I encourage you guys to stick around and meet each other, network, exchange information, and
Thank you for coming and participating.
Yeah.
And they have sushi coming out here.
Oh yeah, and share